Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 733. Today we're going to talk about Ankh. This is one of the latest games to come out from CMON and designer Eric Lang. It is the third in the trilogy of kind of the area control, big miniature games from CMON by Eric Lang. So you got Blood Rage, Rising Sun, and Ankh. But you could probably throw in there the Godfather board game, and if you go way back when, you could probably throw in there Chaos in the Old World as kind of this whole like suite or series of games. This one is the latest. It's a 2 to 5 player kind of area control game, although it does some really different things. And it's set place obviously in ancient Egypt with some of these various different gods and stuff that you can take over and take control of. And you're trying to be kind of like the last god standing. So the one that kind of theoretically in this sort of universe kind of lives on into perpetuity, and all these other gods will die out. So let's jump down to the table. If you've not heard of this game, you probably live under a rock, but I'm going to show you how to play a little bit. It's very, very simple. We'll go to the table, we'll talk about some things, some mechanics and stuff like that. And then I'll come back up here and tell you what I think. Okay, so here you can see I've got kind of the board set up here. Just some pieces kind of randomly thrown out. The gist of the game is that you're going to be moving your giant god-like figures around here with some of your little minions, your sort of troop figures. So you can see the brown player there, and there's a little troop down here from the pink player. And then you're trying to control the different areas. You can see the areas are kind of divided up in a few different ways. You can have these camels out here that will either get added or subtracted depending on the scenario that you're playing. And these are going to divide the areas up. And the areas will also get divided up by rivers and water spaces as well. But you can see here, for example, the pink player has control of that temple, and then maybe the brown player later on will be able to do an action to take control of this temple here, and they'll mark it like that. And I should say, a lot of this stuff that you see here is like the Kickstarter extras, so everything is all plasticized and there's not very much cardboard on the board. I'll just kind of spoil the reviews. I really like the game, but you don't need the Kickstarter stuff at all. So if you're looking to get it for retail, I would 100% recommend that. Okay, next thing is to notice you'll see here these numbers on the board. So we got a 6 and a 5 over there. Over down here is a 1. And these are going to sort of be the order that you resolve the areas when you have a conflict event. So you kind of check majorities of the different monuments and the different gods and the characters on the board every so often during the game. And you're going to score points by controlling the areas and controlling the monuments. That's the basic gist of the game and how you're going to score points and win the game. Now, points are tracked by this thing called devotion. So when you score devotion, you're scoring points, and you're going to start moving your little tokens up the track there. And the first player to get all the way up here to the top, immediately, as soon as they get up there, they're going to win. It's going to interrupt every part of the game that's happening, and they're immediately going to win the game there. Now, the other thing to keep in mind here is you can see these are some red spaces and then some blue spaces there. If you get to a certain point in the game and your token is not into the blue spaces, you're going to get eliminated. Now, thankfully, it's towards the way end of the game, so you won't be sitting around too long, honestly, after that, if that does happen. And it is theoretically possible, let's say all the players are still in the red zone. If we get to the certain part of the game and all the players haven't reached the blue area yet, then everybody loses, although I've never seen that actually happen. And then here you have this main action board. Now you can see, depending on the number of players here, you're going to set these markers at a certain spot. So let's just say we had it set up for a 4-player game like that. So all these markers will be set on this little spot here. And if we adjust our camera just a little bit there, what players are going to be doing on their turn is taking 2 actions. Now when you take an action, you can either do move, summon, gain followers, or unlock an Ankh ability. These are the 4 different actions. So if I want to move my figures, I'll move that there. Okay, now you do 2 actions. So maybe I want to do move first and then gain followers second. You always have to do the top one first, and then the next one has to be underneath there. So I couldn't do gain followers and then move figures like that. So, but I could do, let's say, summon figures and then gain followers. You have to work your way down. You can do 2 actions, and that's what you do. So let's say I did summon figures and gain followers, and then Billy does move figures and summon figure, and then Francesca does gain followers and unlock an Ankh. So these are going to slowly kind of move towards the end here. And so let's say we had a situation, and this can happen. Let's just do this. All of these are like that, okay? And so as soon as somebody moves that figure to this end spot on that track, that will trigger an event phase. And if that is their first action of the turn, that's the only action that they get. So if the board got in such a state here and it was now my turn, I would be effectively eliminated from my second action, but that's actually not the end of the world by any means. So what happens is, let's say I decided to gain followers, I would do this. This would reset back to the player count space. but then the event track would move as soon as you hit that white spot there. So you can see here, whenever that event track is hit, this will move, and the player that triggered that, me in this case, would then trigger one of these different types of events. So here is a control monument step. So you can see we have 3 of those at the beginning. Then we have a conflict. So we'll go around the board and resolve area control and monument control and that kind of stuff. Then you have the camel phase here. And depending on the scenario, you may be adding and removing those camel borders. So you're kind of dividing or merging different regions on the board when you place those camels out. And we just keep going around, and sometimes you'll have like little tokens on certain spots, depending on if you're playing with expansions. So you might have like pharaoh tokens on here, or follower tokens on the conflict spaces, or on the camel spaces, and so on. So we're going to keep going around until, again, somebody reaches here, the top spot on the devotion track. So you just keep playing turn after turn. There's no rounds or anything. We just keep playing until we get interrupted, and then you keep playing from there. Now there's a couple things here. This spot here, once we get to this track here, after this conflict, the last 2 gods that are lowest on the devotion track, the people that are in last place, basically are going to merge into one god. And then if we get to here, then again, anybody that, after we resolve this conflict, anybody that's in the red spaces is going to get eliminated. And then finally here we have the end of the game. So if nobody reaches the top spot on the devotion track, then whoever's highest at this point after we resolve this last conflict will win the game. Although I've never seen it end that way. I've seen it get to this battle here, but I've never had it actually end at the very, very last part of that battle. Somebody is always getting to that top spot. Usually, 9 times out of 10, it's happening here anyway, so there's no elimination. It's usually going to happen where somebody's going to win at some point during that second to last conflict there. That's been my experience anyway. So let's just quickly talk about the 4 actions. You got move, summon, gain followers, unlock Ankh power. Move is very simple. You can take any figures on the board and move them up to 3 spaces. You can move them through other figures, move them through water spaces. You can't actually end up on water spaces or areas with other figures. We just take it and move it 3 spaces away, and then that's it. So you can take all of the figures of your color and move them all over the board. Now summon is to place a new figure out, either adjacent to a monument that you control or adjacent to a figure that is also one of your figures. Now, when you choose the gain follower action, you're going to take a look here on the board. Let's just zoom out slightly here. Any of the monuments that are out here on the board that you control, that you have a figure adjacent to, or even if nobody controls it and it's a neutral one like this one here in the upper left, nobody has their marker in there, but you have a figure next to it, you're going to gain 1 follower. And these are these little tokens here. These are kind of like money. It's a currency that you use in the game. So you're going to gain 1 follower for each monument that is neutral or yours that you also have a figure next to. Very simple. Finally, the last main action you can do is you can unlock an Ankh power. So if we look here, you're going to start your board off like this with all of these tokens here like that. And you have to kind of unlock them in this order. So the first thing you're going to do as far as this goes is you're going to unlock one of these level 1s. The level 1s cost you 1 follower, level 2 cost you 2, level 3 cost you 3. So you pick this up and then you mark one of these powers. And these powers here that you have are the same for everybody. Everybody has the same kind of player board. Now over here you have a special God power. This is different for everybody. So this is the kind of the unique part, but you all have the same kind of board, but you can of course unlock them in different orders. Now you can also see here as you start to unlock other ones, you're going to unlock extra creatures, and these are extra guardians. So once you've done 2 level 1s, the next ones you can do 2 level 2s, unlock a level 2 guardian, and then immediately a level 3 on that one, and then finally that. So you can have a little bit of a configurable player board there. But let's talk, and these are all just kind of crazy powers. I'll talk about more of these in the review, but you really don't want to ignore many of these powers. A lot of them are really good, obviously. So this is really a big part of the game, and a lot of the sort of, you know, tricks and stuff that you can pull off. Now, as far as the guardians here, you're going to randomly deal out a level 1 guardian. You can see here's a level 1. This is Unut. And then you have level 2 and level 3. Now there's a certain number of figures that will come out here based on the number of players. And when you unlock that spot on your board, you're going to take one of your little bases here in your color, attach it, and this can now be a figure that you can summon to the board. So when you do a summon action, instead of one of your main warriors, you can summon one of these guardians that you've unlocked. And these all have a special ability that they can do. Sometimes they're stronger than other figures, or sometimes they, you know, have different special abilities. There's a whole bunch of them that you can take control of. Now that's all of the main actions that you can see here. All 4 of these main actions: move, summon, gain followers, unlock Ankh power. Now, again, like I said, when you move to the end here and you trigger these event phases, these all do different things here. So here, when you move the event tracker to this spot there, then you can take control of a neutral monument that you are adjacent to with one of your figures. So you just simply take one of your little markers here and put it right inside there like that, because you have one of your figures adjacent to a neutral unclaimed monument. Now you can take over somebody else's monument as long as all of the monuments on the board have been claimed. But as long as there's one neutral unclaimed monument, then you can't take over somebody else's monument that they've already claimed. Now the camel space, we've already talked about that. You can, depending on the scenario, add or remove camels, kind of dividing up or merging different areas. But now let's talk about these conflicts here, and then we'll talk about the merging and stuff. So when you trigger a conflict, you're going to walk through all of the areas here in numerical order. So we're going to start at area 1, we're going to then move over here to area 2 over there, and so on. And then you're going to resolve each of these areas and then check for the monument majorities. Now the person who triggered it is going to get this here. So this is actually going to allow them to break a tie, because ties everybody loses. So once per sort of conflict round, the person who claimed that can spend it. There's no conflicting characters because it's all brown. So they're going to get 1 point for just dominating the region. There's no other competing armies or gods there. So they get 1 point for that. And then they'll get 1 point for each type of monument majority they have. So if they have the most of a particular monument, so let's say that we also had a temple in here in addition to that Sphinx, they would get 1 point for each. But if they didn't have the majority, let's move that temple in there. So they don't have a temple majority, so they wouldn't get a point for that. So if it were this case at the end of resolving this area, they would get 1 point for most sphinxes, and no points for most temples. But if they had, the only temple, then they would get a point for that, and then they would get 1 point for dominating or winning that region. So they would get 3 total points out of that. Now, if you had some other competing figures in here, like this, then you're going to have a battle between that. Now, typically, most figures count as kind of 1 point of strength here. So even if we had a god down here, let's say the brown guy was down there, but this would be 1, 2, 3 to 2. And so right now, brown would be winning. But each player has a little deck or hand of cards that they can play. So everybody has this exact hand of cards, and everybody will take and simultaneously play and reveal one of these cards. So once you play the card in this particular combat, so again, we're doing this combat up here, resolving this area, then this will be then discarded and out of use until you play this cycle of mat card, which will then pick up any of the cards that you've played over the course of the game and back into your hand. So it's a way to reset your hand. And you can see one thing these all do is adjust your strength. So if I played this cycle of mat, for example, to maybe pick up some of these other cards I wanted to get access to, it's not going to add any strength to my combat there. Or this one, the chariots here, it's going to add +3 strength. And then, so there's other effects here that are going to deal with the terrain and stuff. I'm not going to get into all of that. There's a plague of locusts where players will kind of blind bid their followers to see who has all of their creatures or characters wiped out. And there's also here this build monument. So you can build a brand new monument in that region and then theoretically even score it. And then you'll build it and you'll immediately place it under your control. Now, it typically costs you 3 followers to do that, but for example, you can unlock a power that lets you do that for free, and so on. So there's a lot of little combinations and things like that. But everybody's that's involved in the combat, so there might be 3 or 4 people even involved. You take and play a card, simultaneously reveal it, resolve the build monument and the plague of locusts first, and then after that, then these other ones will resolve it at the end of combat. And I will say the one interesting thing about this that is sort of different than some area control games is some of these will have to interact with the terrain. So you have desert and fertile spaces here, the green spaces. So you want to be paying attention to where players are not just putting their figures in terms of which areas they're going after, but also which kind of terrain they're in within a given thing. It might give you some of a clue to a card that they might play, and you can kind of take that into consideration. So once you go through and resolve all of these combats here, then you're just going to keep playing. So players will start taking actions again, and more events and stuff like that will trigger. Now, as you get to some of the later combats here, it is possible that you could start resolving combats, and then boom, you get to like area number 3, and then that player has gotten enough devotion or points to win, and they're just immediately going to win. You're not going to resolve any extra areas of conflict. So you do want to kind of know that going into the game. Now, the last bit I want to talk about, I'll just talk briefly about it. I'll talk more about it in the review part, but you will again merge when you get to over here, the 3rd combat that's going to happen there. And so what's going to happen is the two lowest people are here on the devotion track. The person in second to last is going to drop their points back to the last place person. The last place player is going to get rid of their god and all their figures on the board. They're going to give all of their followers to the person that was just ahead of them. And then instead of taking 2 turns or 2 actions per turn, each of the players they're going to basically work together and theoretically even win the game together, but you're only going to get 1 action on your turn. So I'll do an action, and then theoretically you'll do an action on your turn. But there's some drawbacks and some actually bonuses that kind of are actually good, but I'll talk about that in the review. So basically you kind of form to be 1 god. You'll take and put the losing god's little tray thing on the bottom of the guy that was ahead of them. And so you'll work together to try to win the game. Before I forget, like the 1 god that got eliminated will also inherit the special ability of, the god that they merged with. So they'll kind of combine that. And then will reset your Ankh power board as the last place god will reset it to match the one that they merged with there. So you will sort of reset those special abilities. So that's really the gist of the game. The replayability is going to come into play. You've got, I think with all the expansion and stuff, there's like 12 different gods. There's a whole mess of these different guardians that you can get. There's even a special guardian, I can't remember, who goes to like every round he'll go to the, or every conflict he'll go to the player that's in last place. He's a pretty big beefy figure. There's there's actually 11 scenarios now. There's one online you can download. So there's 10 scenarios, but that's also per player count. So there's a 2 capital scenario. You can play that 2 or 3 players. There's the Delta Bounty. You can play that, 3 or 4 players. But there's 10 total different ones in this book, or 11 when you include the download. Now there is also here, other than just the extra gods and guardians and stuff, there's a Pharaoh expansion, which is over here, this board. I'll just show this to you quickly. I've only played with this once. So you can actually send some of your priest figures to this board or move them around. When you take a move or summon action, you can also move or summon a priest in these different halls. And then you can also get cards. So every time you have a monument event where players will be marking control of monuments, you also will then resolve this board in order. And most of that's going to be like getting followers or taking these special action cards, which are going to kind of go into your hand of battle cards. And these you can play and then recover, with the mat card. And then these are just going to be things that you can play in addition to your action. So if I do an action, then I can also play one of these cards. But that's pretty much it. So let's go to the review. Okay, so that is Ankh. So let's jump right into my 3 pillars of review. First, we'll talk about playtime. Box is 90 minutes. I think that's about accurate. I have played it 5-player. It probably went more than 90 minutes. Probably not too much longer, and it was, I think, everybody's first game in that particular game except for me. So I think it was about 2 hours or so. And I think honestly with 5 players, you probably are looking at about a 2-hour game, just because there can be a lot kind of happening in the different regions, and you're like, okay, Billy's over here, Francesca's threatening over here, back and forth, and the board state's going to kind of change up a little bit. So I think you're probably honestly looking at a 5-player, 2-hour game, but I could see some people playing that in less time, maybe even a little bit more too, if you're really AP prone. Then you're probably a good 2.5 hours, maybe 3, but 3 tops. But with lesser players, certainly less than 90 minutes with 2 players, easily. Like you can play it in 45 minutes or so, especially if both players know. So yeah, it's a ballpark there. Now, as far as player count, what do I prefer? I really like it at all player counts. Even 2-player is really, really cool. This is easily his best. Well, I'm going to come out and say this is my favorite of the trilogy. And it's my favorite. I've not played Chaos in the Old World, but whatever, it's out of print. Nobody cares. Sorry. That was a message for somebody that chimes in once in a while. And, he knows I play with him. But so I haven't played Chaos in the Old World, but I played Blood Rage, Rising Sun, The Godfather, this one. This, I think, the more I've played it, and this is why it's kind of taken me a while to get to the review, because I've had this for a while, and I couldn't tell if I really liked it at all at first, and this kind of thing, and I don't really know the merge stuff, which I'll talk about in a second. So I really was struggling with it, but the more I've played it, the more I've enjoyed it, and I just kept liking it more and more every time I play it. Now, back to my original point, there are 2 players. I could play Blood Rage 2 players and be pretty happy with it, because it's got the card drafting and stuff. Like, it's okay 2 players. I would play Blood Rage 2 players. Rising Sun doesn't even play 2 players, and I don't remember if Godfather played 2. I don't think it does. It's been a while since I played that. But this is a really, really cool 2-player game, and I would recommend it as a two-player game. If you only ever played it two-player, I'd probably still recommend it. Now, I prefer it with more players, and I've played it with 2, 3, and 5. I've not yet played it with 4, but you know, it's funny because I kind of feel like 4 might be the best player count, but just because I played it with 3 and 5, and it's like 5 was really good though. Like 5 was really, really good. I don't know. 5 was. I haven't played with 4, but I think 5 is my favorite out of the player counts I've played it with. But I really liked it with 3. I really liked it with 2. I don't really think it makes too much of a difference to me. Now, I think your mileage might vary with that, but for me, really, I could play this with any player count. And that's probably why this is my favorite out of his trilogy of games. There's some other reasons too, but that's a big part of it. Now, when you take a look at this game, and this is my last pillar where I kind of like compare it to, like, you know, what games is this like? Obviously, you're going to immediately compare it to his other big miniature area control games, or just area control games in general is really what you can compare it to. The things that this thing does that are different than a lot of these other games, there's just so many like little things, but they're not little, they're big. There's so many big things that it does that are just little turns of the dial in a lot of ways that just, to me, take it up. So first thing, I mentioned kind of at the end there, the terrain piece. That's a really cool thing. I mean, that's a simple thing. That's a little thing, but it really, really affects the game, because most of the time in these area control games, you're like, I'm shoving guys here or here, sprinkling guys out here in these different like little compartments and areas that you're trying to get majority in and score points and whatever the area control mechanism is. But now you have a specificity within those larger compartments and those regions where you're like, oh, there's a bunch of grass here. This has got a good mix of grass, and some of the different monsters and stuff will interact with water. Like you can place some of the, I think it's Sobek, you can put him in the water. Some of the guardians, those extra monsters that are like the mercenaries that you can sort of hire, if you will. Some of those can go in the water. So the interaction with the terrain of the specific singular space on the board within, you know, the larger area, that's a cool little tactical thing that I think is really, really cool. And it's just something that I've really come to appreciate with the game. So that's a neat little twist there. The other thing that's neat is the actual area control is not like a winner take all kind of thing. Now it can be, because if all your figures are eliminated from like a conflict, then even if you've got some monuments in there, then you're not going to score those. But you can play some cards, and there's some effects and things that you can do to keep guys around. And then so you're still going to get some points out of that area. It's still possible to do that. So, you know, okay, yeah, you come in and you take over an area theoretically, and you're going to win it. But if I can keep just the guy around, and I have got 3 different monuments I'm going to control, you're going to get 1 point, I'm going to get 3 points. So that's a theoretically possible situation that you could have. And so that's a neat kind of thing. So it's not such a winner take all, zero sum kind of attitude about each of the different areas, which is cool, which I like that. Now, the other thing that I think is neat is the dividing up and changing of the areas, so that those are going to kind of change. It doesn't stay very static. So you can, it's really interesting. This really hit me because there's a couple of scenarios that have these cities. So instead of controlling different areas, you also want to maintain control of these 2 capital cities. And these are the plastic bits. So there's little cardboard ones here. So you have these like big hexagon-y looking things there. So you control these, but you don't actually get any points for these, but you'll get followers when you control these, and everybody else is going to lose points. So that's very interesting, because they can be in regions with monuments that you have to control, right? So, but having the guys around the cities doesn't really do anything. It's just preventing you from losing 2 points. But at the end of the game, it really has this big like dynamic tug on the rest of the game. And so the way you can actually divide up some of the stuff with the camels is you can sort of push, because somebody can like get the cities, have monuments, and then they're just like hammering you, right? But if you carve it up right, then you're like, cool, you control a city that doesn't do anything, but now I've carved this up and now there's other areas. So now you have to start pulling their figures away from the city. Anyway, so it's a good kind of dynamic there with that kind of shifting region. And it's a really cool thing because it's really thematic in that way. And this is one of the other things that I really like about this. Now, his other games, you know, and there's been other air control games that are really thematic. His other games are kind of thematic. You know, they have the Viking gods and then the Japanese style gods and stuff like that from Rising Sun. And it's kind of in the ballpark. But what I really like about this one is not just sort of and I'm trying to pick my words carefully here because I really do enjoy those games with the different themes, but it's not just like you have these flavorful abilities and powers and stuff in some of those other ones, but to be like the winning god or whatever. But this one's interesting because of the merge, because of the dividing and merging theoretically of the landscape, that fits this theme of like trying to be the last god standing. Because you have all these like mythological gods that their message through history and through time, you're trying to be that message that lasts, right? So you're trying to be the voice that carries on into the millennia. Like you get that feeling of this because this kingdom that these sort of principalities are sort of fighting over is changing and morphing. And so the real life stuff that's happening is happening on the board. So you can see all this kind of stuff happening. The kingdom's changing, these different territories are happening. And then you have the merge of the gods on that third thing. So it's like these two gods, and that's very indicative to this area of the world and this time period where the religious ideas and stuff like that are shared. Like if you go back through even some of the Judeo-Christian stuff, some of those ideas and stuff that are in some of those books and some of the things that they reference and all that, like that's all like it's like a soup of religion and spirituality and stuff. And so some of those ideas are carried forward and shared between the religions and stuff. And so these people had these kind of it's almost like a creativity that they had with coming up with these sort of religious ideas back then. And so you kind of see that play out. Whereas, so you see it in a way that's very mystical and magical, and these gods are sort of roaming, the land of Egypt here, and you would see that in Rising Sun and Blood Rage. And so you'd see these things kind of come to life and move around, and you have your little warriors and your disciples moving around. But because of the merge and sort of the dividing of the land, it's like you're pushing little ideas around. Like even though it's a big god, it's like, this big huge figure, this physical presence. It's like, you can see the ideas from the different towns and the monuments and the temples, and it just layers up that little abstract layer and just grounds it for me in this sort of a little bit more of a reality kind of thing. And it was really cool. Like it's just like this extra presence that's there, and then like the transmit. Because you think about it's like, why do some ideas take hold and last millennia and others don't? Like if you think about that, it's a very strange topic. Like why do some things persist in our language and our cadence? And that's going to vary. If you go to like, I'll just call it Far East Asia, and some of the ideas that sort of like have lasted millennia there versus some other parts of the world. Like it's really interesting just to think about that. Anyway, so that I kind of get that vibe from this, right? These different sort of, gods living around and stuff. So mechanically though, let's talk about the merge. Is I really, really like this. Like it's such a cool, like risky thing to do. But I get why people would hate it. I get that. Because you could have a game, I haven't seen a game like this yet personally, but you could have a game where somebody's just doing terrible and they're really low on the devotion track, I guess. And then whoever's in second to last place just gets sucked all the way back down there and they're just never going to catch up. So I can see that happening. I don't know that it would happen very often, but I really like, again, that merge thematically, but also mechanically, it just shifts the board. And so once you start to get to the point where the merge is going to happen, there's a lot of table talk that can go on. And you're like, you know what? And instead of being second to last place, or maybe third to last place, I don't want to be that. That's the bad spot because I'm going to merge. Sure, I'll drop a couple of devotion points, but we're going to merge. We're going to share followers. We're going to be able to do that double action thing and then even catch up, right? So there's something where you might try to like almost kind of sandbag it if you're second to last to stay in second to last so you can merge because you kind of in some ways become a little bit more powerful. In some ways not though, because what happens is you only get one action per player, right? So it's effectively the two actions are divided between you. Now, depending on the seeding order, that's really going to kind of dictate, I think, how effective or not that is. But the one thing that's really cool about it is you can sort of double up on the same action too, because you know how when I explained there, you have to do one of the top actions like move and then summon or whatever. Like you can't like do summon on your turn. Well, between the two players, you could do that. I could summon, and now it's your turn. You get one action. You can summon. So boom, boom, summon, summon. And if one of you has the pyramid, and the pyramid has a special ability, we can get extra guys out. So you can be like, oh crap, they're just spreading like wildfire. This like new religion has popped up, and now they're spreading everywhere. Or you could do, all kinds of different stuff. So it just turns the game on its head, and it's really, especially in the 5-player game I played, it really just added to such table talk and trash talking, like from the instant of the game. It's like, a couple people would get like 2-3 devotion, and then somebody that maybe got 1 in that first compact, and everybody's like, whoa, we gotta watch out now, Billy. Billy's in last. We don't want to be around there. So it just adds that extra layer of dimension to the game, and it's cool because a lot of these games where you have the game from the get is diplomatic and all this kind of stuff. So you think of the Game of Thrones board game, the Twilight Imperium, some of those other games like that, where the diplomacy aspect of it is just really baked into the game. And I think to the point where if you're not really into that, like say 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours of haggling and just, I think a lot of people can not be into that, where you're just really arguing and in a fun way, but passing laws or whatever, or stabbing each other in the back and all that for like 4 hours or 8 hours. I mean, that gets a little bit much. But here is interesting because it's like just a little salt dash of that in the game on top of such a very, very simple thing where you just kind of get into normal area control. But the other area control games can kind of miss out on that, and you can have like a runaway leader sometimes with that. So it's just a perfect, I think, little amount of sprinkle into that. So last thing I'll leave you with is again, the simplicity of the system is really neat. It's just those 4 actions. Move. All you're doing is moving figures around, summoning figures, getting followers, which you can spend to unlock Ankh powers. Now those followers you can use in some of your special abilities and some of the Plague of Locust cards. So those followers, you want to have that kind of money to spend. But your turns are so dead simple. And then you're just marking monuments you control, and then possibly dividing up a land, and then you're resolving conflicts. It's got to be, I think, the simplest out of all 3 of the Lang area control games. And then you plug and play. And if you watch my channel a lot, I love plug and play. You have a super dead simple thing, and you drop in powers, right? So you've got all the powers on the God board, all the different God powers, all the different Guardian powers, all the different scenarios. Now you also have the Pharaoh expansion, which I played with once, and this is the only thing I don't like about the game. I didn't really like the Pharaoh expansion. I played it with 2 players, and I kind of think after playing it, I'm like, this may not be great for a 2-player game. It might be much better for probably a 4 and a 5-player game. I don't think I'd even play it with 3. Because those cards and crap in there, like it's just so much extra stuff that you can get so many different cards, and some of them like make you lose devotion. There's even an action you can take to discard one of those extra cards to lose devotion. It's like, ugh, I don't know about this. So I'm gonna keep that, but I'm gonna keep that aside and like play this more. Maybe once more people have played it a lot more times and we have a big game, maybe I'll throw it in there. But that's the only thing I haven't really enjoyed about the game is that Pharaoh expansion. And again, that was with a 2-player game. But I don't know. I don't think the game needs that, though. I don't think it needs that. I will leave with the one last thing. I will say, if you didn't get the Kickstarter or whatever, I had some people ask me, I would say just get the base game, and then there's a box that's like Pantheon, I think it's called, and it's just a bunch of the extra gods, and I think there's some extra guardians in there. Just get that. Just get the base game in that, and then that'll just give you a lot of stuff to mix up, and there's a lot of replayability and stuff there. And that's all you need, because it comes with the scenarios. Those are all in the base game, and the scenarios are really cool. I've played not all of them, but I played several of them. And there's just some real cool, interesting dynamics there that really change stuff up and keep it fresh and interesting. So I honestly can't recommend it highly enough. I say that with the knowledge that some people might actually hate the merge mechanic and all that stuff. But if you go in knowing that, if you go in like prepared to get hosed in a way, or somebody's going to get hosed, and it could be that I've seen the merge players come back and not yet win, but they've been like 1 point away from winning. So it's definitely possible to merge down and then make your way all the way back up, and you have a shot at winning. At least you got a shot. And I know I've read online of people that have won, you know, like these people that they merged and then they won, and everybody was like, well, that's too overpowered. And it's like, I don't know which it is. Is it overpowered? Is it not? I think it's great. Like, there's so many games out there that don't have this kind of thing that you can go play, and then you should. But this is great. Like, I'm glad this is around, because now there's this dynamic that doesn't exist in these other games that's here, and it's fresh and it's interesting and it's cool. All right, that's Ankh. Thanks.